The hospital clock read 7:42 a.m. when Grace Whitman finally clocked out. 26 hours of non-stop trauma. A double shift that bled into dawn. Her scrubs were stiff with coffee stains. Her feet felt like stones, and her mind was a blur of codes, alarms, and whispered prayers that had long since turned mechanical. The automatic doors hissed open, and a chill autumn wind swept across her face. For a moment, she stood there on the sidewalk, breathing deeply. The scent of wet asphalt and pine needles, reminding her she was still alive, still tethered to the world beyond the fluorescent lights of the ER. By the time she reached her little gray sedan, exhaustion had taken a physical form. A weight pressing behind her eyes, her head dipping forward at red lights. The drive home was muscle memory. Turn right at the bakery, left at the park, slow down before the cul-de-sac. She didn't remember pulling into her driveway, only the faint scrape of gravel under the tires, and the sigh that left her chest when she saw her porch light still on. Ivan must have forgotten again, she muttered, fumbling with her keys. Her son had always been forgetful, sweet but scattered. The kind of boy who could build an entire computer but couldn't remember to switch off the stove. Grace had accepted that, just as she'd accepted Lena, his wife, beautiful, efficient, and perpetually smiling in that way that didn't quite reach her eyes. The front door opened with a soft click. The house smelled different. Not bad, just different. A hint of lemon disinfectant, vanilla candles, and something faintly metallic beneath it all. Grace blinked under the kitchen light. At first, she thought her exhaustion was playing tricks on her. Then she froze. There, beside her old cream-colored refrigerator, stood a second one, brand new, tall, silver, and sleek, its chrome surface gleaming under the light. 2 fridges, side by side like silent sentinels. "What in the world?" she whispered. She stepped closer, running a hand along its cold metallic side. It was spotless. No magnets, no smudges, no receipts, just perfect emptiness reflecting her wary face back at her. "Morning, Mom," came a bright voice behind her. Grace jumped slightly, turning to see Lena gliding into the kitchen in her robe. Hair neatly tied, a mug of coffee in her manicured hand. "You scared me," Grace said, forcing a tired smile. "What's this?" She gestured toward the new appliance. "Another fridge." Lena sipped from her mug, her smile unbothered. "Oh, that. Yes. The old one's been acting up, so I thought I'd get a new one before it breaks down. There was a sale at Hillstone Appliances." "Without telling me." "Well, I didn't want to bother you while you were working those long hours," Lena said sweetly. "Besides, it's for all of us. More space for groceries." Grace stared at her, unsure whether to be grateful or uneasy. "You could have waited," she said quietly. "We don't exactly need to." Lena's tone remained syrupy. "You can never have too much storage, especially for meal prep." That made Grace's brow furrow. Meal prep. But Lena was already turning away, humming as she rinsed her cup. The hum of the new fridge filled the silence. It was deeper than the old ones, almost like a mechanical heartbeat. Grace pressed her palm against her temple. Her body screamed for sleep. "Fine," she murmured. "I'm too tired for this." She shuffled down the hall to her bedroom, her bones aching as she kicked off her shoes. The moment her head hit the pillow, her body shut down. Hours passed. Somewhere in the fog between waking and dreaming, Grace heard a faint sound, a click, then a low hum, then silence. When she opened her eyes, the room was dim. Afternoon light filtered through the curtains. The house was quiet except for the muffled buzz of the refrigerator down the hall. She dragged herself up, throat dry. On her way to the kitchen, She noticed something odd. The floor was spotless. Her old habit of leaving a mug in the sink, a newspaper on the counter, all gone. The space looked sterile, like a staged home in a catalog. Both fridges stood side by side, humming softly. Her old one was slightly open. She reached for it, pulling the door gently shut. That's when she noticed the padlock hanging from the handle of the new fridge. A real padlock. Silver, heavy, solid. Her fingers brushed it. Cold metal. She blinked. "Lena," she called out. "Why is there a lock on this thing?" No answer. She checked the living room. Empty. Evan's work boots were gone. The garage door was closed. The silence pressed in. Grace tried the lock, tight. No movement. She stepped back, unease prickling along her arms. Locks a fridge. Maybe Lena kept expensive desserts or meal prep supplies for her diet. Maybe she didn't want Grace's son eating her portion meals. Maybe it was nothing. But then Grace noticed something else. A faint, reddish streak trailing down from the edge of the fridge door to the floor. No more than a few inches long. It looked like sauce, or juice, or something else entirely. She knelt, touched it lightly. Sticky, smelled faintly, metallic. Her stomach tightened. Probably beet juice. She muttered to herself, wiping it on a napkin. Still, her nurse's instinct stirred like a whisper in her mind. That small, clinical sense that something wasn't normal. Something alive once bled that color. She shook it off. Too many overnight shifts. Too many emergencies replaying in her head. She grabbed a bottle of water, sat on the couch, and turned on the TV. White noise filling the empty air. Within minutes, her eyelids grew heavy again. Just before sleep claimed her, the hum of the new fridge changed pitch. A deeper tone, almost like a breath. Then came a soft click, as if the door had been opened, ever so slightly. Grace stirred, but didn't wake. In the reflection of the dark TV screen, the kitchen light flickered once. And in that reflection, just for a second, a shadow moved near the fridge. The next morning began with silence. No clatter of dishes, no hum of conversation. Just the steady rhythm of the two refrigerators, their layered buzz filling the air like a low, constant murmur. Grace rubbed her temples as she walked into the kitchen. The air felt cooler than usual, too clean, too controlled. Lena stood by the counter, wearing an apron and rubber gloves, emptying the pantry shelf by shelf. Jars, tins, spices, all lined up with surgical precision. The old chaos of home, cooked life had vanished overnight. Morning, Grace managed, yawning. "You're up early." Lena didn't look up. Couldn't sleep. "Thought I'd do a little reorganizing." Grace reached for a mug. "You don't need to do all that. The pantry's fine." "Oh, it was a mess," Lena said lightly, her tone clipped but cheerful. "Dust everywhere. Expired things. We shouldn't be eating half of what was in here." Grace frowned. "I check those dates regularly." Lana shrugged. "I'm just helping Grace. You work so hard. Let me handle the little things." That phrase, "the little things," pricked at her. The way Lena said, it sounded like a warning dressed as kindness. Grace stirred her coffee quietly and took a sip. Her eyes drifted to the new fridge. It was locked again. The padlock glinted in the morning sun. She forced her gaze away. "Where's Ivan?" "Left for work an hour ago. Said he had an early call." Lena didn't stop moving. Every few minutes she'd glance toward the new fridge, almost protectively, before turning back to the shelves. Grace's stomach twisted. She wanted to ask again about the lock, about the hum, about the faint sound she'd heard last night. That soft click, like a hand gently closing a secret. But she stayed quiet. Instead, she said, "You threw out the apple jam." Lena's gloves paused mid-air. It was past date. It was homemade. From my sister. I didn't see a label. Her voice was flat. Final. Grace felt something small and sharp break inside her chest. Not anger, exactly, but that peculiar ache of being quietly erased in your own home. That afternoon, Grace sat by the living room window, pretending to read, while Lena busied herself in the kitchen. She watched the younger woman move with a rhythm that was too practiced, too deliberate. Every motion calculated. The lock clicked once as Lena opened it with a key and slipped something inside. Grace strained her eyes. She saw a flash of silver, maybe a container, maybe a metal tray. Then Lena turned slightly, catching Grace's gaze. For a heartbeat, neither spoke. Lena's smile was polite, but her eyes were ice. She shut the fridge and pocketed the key. "Can I help you with something?" she asked. Grace blinked, startled. "No, you seem curious." Lena interrupted softly. "About my fridge." "Your fridge," Grace repeated. Lena wiped her hands on her apron. "Well, I paid for it, didn't I?" There it was. The first open claim. The tone of ownership. Grace managed a tired laugh. "I suppose you did." "You shouldn't worry about it," Lena said, walking closer. "You've got enough on your mind. I know how tired you must be after all those shifts. Sleep deprivation can make people imagine things." The words slid in like a knife wrapped in velvet. Grace stiffened but said nothing. Lena smiled again, wider this time, before turning away. That night, Evan came home. Grace waited until after dinner, until Lena had gone to shower, before asking quietly, "Evan, that new fridge. Did you know she was buying it?" Her son rubbed his neck, eyes darting toward the hallway. "Yeah. She mentioned it. She didn't mention the padlock." He sighed. "Mom, please don't start." "I'm not starting anything. I just find it strange. She keeps her diet stuff in there. Special ingredients, I guess. You know how she is." Grace raised an eyebrow. "Do diet ingredients need to be locked away?" Ivan looked irritated now. "You're reading too much into it. She's trying to make this place better for us. Organized. Clean. Organized." Grace echoed quietly. He hesitated, softening a little. "She's not trying to replace you, Mom. She just likes things her way. Don't take it personally." But Grace smiled faintly, but her chest felt tight. "I'll try not to." Later that night, when the house was asleep, she tiptoed into the kitchen. The moonlight spilled across the tiled floor, catching on the chrome of the new fridge. She placed her hand against it. It vibrated faintly, a low hum beneath her palm, like something alive. She pressed her ear against the surface. For a long moment, all she heard was the motor's steady rhythm. Then, faintly, so faintly she thought she imagined it, came a sound, a soft whisper, almost a sigh. She jerked back, heart hammering. The hum rose slightly, deepened, then leveled out again. Her hands trembled. "It's just the compressor," she whispered to herself. Old nurse brain. Too many night shifts. She turned to leave but froze when she noticed something on the floor near the baseboard. A small white tag, like one from a hospital wristband. She crouched and picked it up. It read PET INTO3F, TRNR. The air seemed to vanish from the room. Grace's fingers tightened around the tag. The letters were smudged but unmistakable. The kind of label she'd seen 1,000 times in the ER. She stared at the fridge. The hum seemed louder now. Then she heard footsteps behind her. Lena's voice, soft and controlled. "Couldn't sleep again." Grace turned, pulse racing. "I dropped something." Lena's gaze flickered to the tag in her hand. For a second, her face went still. No expression, just a blank, chilling calm. Then she smiled. You shouldn't snoop, Grace. It's not healthy. She plucked the tag from Grace's fingers and tossed it into the trash with a casual flick. It's just an old label from one of Evan's boxes. He was cleaning the garage earlier. The Grace wanted to ask more, to demand answers, but something in Lena's eyes, that poised, unbothered certainty, made her stay quiet. Lena walked to the fridge, rested her hand on the lock, and looked over her shoulder. You really need to rest, she said softly. The mind plays tricks when it's tired. Then she walked back down the hall, the hum of the fridge following her like a shadow. Grace stood there for a long time, staring at the silver door. In her mind, one thought repeated again and again. Steady, clinical, undeniable. That wasn't from the garage. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and exhaustion. Grace had been on the floor for 11 hours already, but work was easier than being home. In the ER, there were rules, order, logic. At home, there was only that humming thing sitting in her kitchen, and Lena's smile that never reached her eyes. As Grace wrapped a bandage around a patient's arm, her colleague Maria leaned over the counter. You look wrecked, Whitman. Don't tell me you picked up another double. Grace gave a weak smile. I'd rather face bleeding strangers than my daughter. In-law reorganizing the pantry. Maria laughed. The pretty one. I saw a picture once. She looks like she irons her hair with a ruler. Grace snorted softly. She's efficient. Too efficient. The house doesn't feel like mine anymore. What's wrong with efficient? Grace hesitated. She bought a second fridge. Maria raised a brow. So, it's locked. That stopped her. Locked. Like a real lock. Padlock, Grace said. And she gets defensive if I even look at it. Maria smirked, trying to lighten the mood. Maybe she's hiding chocolate. Grace didn't smile. If it were chocolate, she wouldn't need a key. Maria leaned on the counter. You think she's up to something? I don't know. Grace said quietly. But every time I walk past that fridge, I feel. She stopped, searching for the right word. Like it's watching me. Maria chuckled nervously. That's the sleep deprivation talking, Grace. Maybe. But she didn't believe it. When Grace returned home that night, the house was dim except for the soft light spilling from the kitchen. Evan was on the couch, laptop open, headphones in. Lena wasn't there. Grace walked in quietly, her bag still slung over her shoulder. Both fridges hummed side by side like mechanical twins. She moved closer, drawn to the sound. The old fridge made its usual low purr, steady and predictable. The new one, its hum was deeper, uneven, almost breathing. She frowned. The air near it felt slightly warmer, like a faint current radiating from the door. She knelt to check the base vent. A trick from years of nursing when she'd fixed everything herself. That's when she saw it, a puddle forming on the tile. A slow drip of condensation seeping from under the fridge door, glistening pink in the light. Grace's breath caught. She tore a paper towel from the counter, crouched, and touched the liquid. It was sticky. She lifted the towel to her nose, metallic. Not fruit juice, not sauce, something darker, denser. She dropped the towel, her pulse racing. No, she whispered. No, it can't be. The rational nurse inside her argued immediately. Old refrigerant leak, rust, maybe meat defrosting in bad packaging. But deep down, her instincts whispered something colder. Blood. The next morning, she mentioned it to Evan. He laughed it off. Mom, it's probably just dye from one of Lena's juice cleanses. She makes those beet things all the time. Evan, it wasn't beet juice. He sighed, rubbing his eyes. You've been overworking yourself again. Lena told me you're barely sleeping. Please, don't start imagining things. Grace's voice sharpened. I didn't imagine a padlock. Or the tag I found. He frowned. Tag, she hesitated. Never mind, Mum, Lena's trying, okay? She just wants this place clean and safe. Grace stared at him. Safe, she repeated. Right. He stood, avoiding her gaze. Look, I have to go. We'll talk later. As he left, Grace caught a faint smell near his jacket. Lemon disinfectant. The same one Lena had started using. At the hospital the next day, Grace couldn't focus. Every beep, every sterilized tray, reminded her of that metallic scent. Between patients, she pulled out her phone and opened the security app for the small camera she'd installed months ago. One hidden behind a kitchen plant. Facing the counter, she hadn't used it in ages. The feed loaded slowly. She watched. At 2:47 a.m., the motion detector flicked on. Lena entered the kitchen in her robe, barefoot, moving deliberately. She unlocked the fridge. Grace leaned closer to the screen, heart thudding. Inside, she could see faint reflections of silver containers. Not food trays, not bottles. More like medical equipment. Lena slipped on latex gloves, opened one container, and removed something Grace couldn't identify. Small, cylindrical, wrapped in gauze. She placed it into a smaller box, sealed it, labeled it with tape, and wrote something across it in black marker. Grace squinted. The video was grainy, but she caught part of the label. TURNER 10 Prezoder 3. The same name from the tag. Lena closed the fridge, wiped the counter with disinfectant, and turned toward the camera. Her eyes landed directly on the lens. Then she smiled. Slow, deliberate. Before reaching up and pulling the plug on the wall, the feed went black. Grace sat frozen in the staff lounge, the hum of vending machines buzzing behind her. Her chest ached, as if something was pressing down on it. She played the footage again, but the last few seconds had corrupted. Only the faint hum remained, low, rhythmic, almost mocking. Maria found her there an hour later. Grace, you okay? Grace snapped her phone shut. Just tired. Maria studied her face. You look pale. You sure you're not sick? I'm fine, Grace said, too quickly. I just need sleep. But that night, when she drove home, she didn't go inside right away. She sat in her car with the engine off, watching the kitchen window glow faintly. Through the curtain, she saw Lena moving, methodical, graceful. The fridge light flickered as she opened it again. For a moment, Grace thought she saw something glint in Lena's hand. Metal, maybe surgical steel. Then the curtain closed. Inside, she could almost hear Lena's voice in her mind. You need to rest. The mind plays tricks when it's tired. Grace opened her glove compartment and pulled out an old notebook. The kind she'd used during trauma cases. She flipped to a blank page and began to write 21:47 a.m. Lena with surgical tools. Turner tag. Same as hospital record. Blood, like condensation. Need proof. Her pen pressed harder with each word. Her pulse steadied. The nurse in her, the one who'd seen death, who'd known truth from panic, took over. If she's hiding something, Grace whispered, I'll find out. She glanced toward the house again. Through the curtains, the kitchen light went off. The only glow that remained was the soft blue reflection from the new fridge, humming steadily in the dark. Sleep had become a rumor in Grace Whitman's life. When she did manage a few hours, her dreams were filled with the metallic hum of the kitchen. One long, endless vibration that followed her even into daylight. This morning the house was already bright when she opened her eyes. Too bright. Lena had drawn back every curtain, letting sunlight pour across the spotless counters. The scent of lemon cleaner floated through the air like perfume. Lena stood by the sink, humming faintly as she wiped the same corner of the counter again and again. "Morning," Grace said. Lena turned, smiling. "You slept in. Good. You needed it. I barely remember lying down." "That's a good sign, isn't it?" Lena rinsed her rag, wrung it dry. "I was thinking we could clear out the basement today. Get rid of the clutter." Grace forced a polite nod. "Maybe later." Her eyes slid to the new fridge. The padlock glinted like an accusation. "Still keeping that locked?" she asked quietly. Lena's shoulders stiffened. "Of course. Some of my supplements need a stable temperature. The door has to stay sealed." "You could have just said that." "I did," Lena said sweetly. "Maybe you weren't listening." For a second their eyes met, and something unspoken tightened the air between them. Then Lena's smile returned. Too smooth, too rehearsed. "You should get ready for your shift, Grace. Leave the housework to me." Grace turned away before her expression could betray anything. "Fine. I'll shower." But the moment she reached her bedroom, she didn't go to the bathroom. She opened the top drawer of her nightstand and pulled out a small motion sensor camera. One she used years ago to monitor her father when his memory began to fade. The size of a thumb drive, silent and simple. If Lena was hiding something, Grace would see it. That afternoon, while Lena left for errands, Grace moved fast. She tucked the camera behind the ceramic sugar jar, its lens aimed directly at the new fridge. She tested the angle with her phone. Perfect. Before leaving for work, she glanced back once at the kitchen. The fridge gleamed, indifferent, humming softly. "Let's see what you're keeping so cold," she murmured. The ER that night was chaos. Car accidents, a feverish child, a woman whispering that she'd been followed. Grace worked on autopilot, hands moving with practiced precision, while her mind drifted home. Every beep of a monitor felt like the rhythmic pulse of that refrigerator motor. When she finally returned home the next morning, she went straight to her bedroom, shut the door, and opened the camera app. The footage began 7:12 p.m. Lena enters the kitchen, grocery bags in hand. Lady 4:05 p.m. She cooks, cleans, moves normally. 10:05 p.m. Even joins her, they talk, laugh, normal. 12:16 a.m. Lights dim, even leaves. 2047 a.m. Movement detected. Grace's breath caught. The feed showed Lena entering again, barefoot, hair loose, robe tied tight. She looked calm, almost serene. Lena reached into her robe pocket, pulled out a key, and unlocked the fridge. She took out a small silver case and set it on the counter. From a drawer, she removed a notebook, opened it, and began writing something, each line neat and deliberate. Then she closed the notebook, slid the case back into the fridge, and stood perfectly still. Her head turned slightly, eyes landing directly on the hidden camera. Her smile grew. She raised her hand and waved. Grace's stomach dropped. Lena walked to the counter, leaned close to the camera lens, and whispered something. The microphone caught only a faint hiss, no words, just a tone that made Grace's skin crawl. Then Lena reached behind the jar, adjusted the camera slightly so her own face filled the frame, and mouthed clearly, "Good night, Grace." The feed cut out. Grace sat motionless. The room around her seemed smaller now, the air heavy. She replayed the last frame again and again, until her own reflection blurred into the screen. The rational part of her mind, the nurse trained to categorize every symptom, whispered, "She found the camera. She knows you're watching." Another voice, quieter but stronger, answered, "She wants you to know." When she finally left her room, the house felt different. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was waiting. Lena's voice floated from the living room. "You're up early. Coffee." Grace walked in, keeping her face neutral. "Sure." Lena handed her a mug, perfectly brewed, the smell rich and sweet. "Long night?" Lena asked. "Busy as always." Grace forced a sip. "How about you?" "Oh, quiet." Lena's eyes flicked toward the fridge. "I did a little organizing." Grace glanced at the lock. "Still keeping that shut tight." "You'd be surprised how curious people can be," Lena said softly. The words hung there, deliberate, heavy. Grace set the mug down, her pulse steadying. "Lena, what exactly is in that fridge?" Lena smiled faintly. "Things you wouldn't understand." "I work in an ER," Grace said. "Try me." The younger woman tilted her head. "Sometimes understanding can be dangerous, Grace. You of all people should know that." Then she brushed past her, calm and unhurried, leaving a faint trace of citrus behind. Grace stood alone in the kitchen, staring at the padlock gleaming under the morning light. Her exhaustion burned away, replaced by something colder, cleaner resolve. If Lena wanted a game, Grace would play. But she'd make her own rules. She reached for her phone, thumb hovering over a contact she hadn't used in years. An old friend from the hospital's security department. Then she stopped. If she called for help now, she'd sound delusional. No one would believe her. Not after weeks of sleepless shifts and Lena's careful performance of domestic perfection. No. She'd gather proof first. Grace walked to the fridge and pressed her hand against the metal door. The hum vibrated beneath her palm, steady, almost smug. She leaned close and whispered, "Let's see what secrets you keep when the lights go out." That night, before heading to another shift, she installed a second camera, smaller, hidden in the ceiling vent. When she closed the door behind her, she thought she heard it again, the faintest sound from the fridge. Not humming this time. Grace didn't go straight home that morning. She parked 3 blocks away and sat in her car until the sun lifted over the roofs, turning the street to gold. Her hands still smelled faintly of antiseptic. Every breath felt too shallow, as though the night had stolen something she couldn't name. When she finally stepped inside, the house was spotless. The air was cool, and Lena was gone. A note sat on the kitchen counter in neat, slanted handwriting. "Went to the farmer's market. Evan said you might be sleeping late. Breakfast is in the fridge. L." The message was casual, too casual. The word fridge seemed to throb on the page. Grace folded the note carefully, slipped it into her pocket, and turned to the refrigerator. The lock was still there, the silver metal shining like a threat. But what she wanted wasn't inside yet. It was on the ceiling. She dragged the step-ladder from the hall closet, climbed up, and removed the tiny camera from the vent. Her heart hammered as she connected it to her laptop. The footage began to load. She skipped through the hours she'd been gone. Empty kitchen, dim lights, nothing unusual. Then, around 1:43 a.m., the movement sensor triggered. Lena entered again. But this time she wasn't alone. A man followed her. Broad shoulders, his face hidden by a hood. He moved with an easy confidence, as if he'd been there before. Grace froze, watching as Lena unlocked the fridge. She pulled out the same small silver case. The man opened it, revealing something wrapped in gauze, though the camera couldn't focus sharply enough to show what. Lena handed him a vial, clear liquid glinting under the dim light. He tucked it into his jacket pocket, nodded, and left the way he came. Lena stood there for a long moment afterward, staring at the fridge, her hands resting on the cold metal. Then she reached into the case again, took out a photograph, and placed it on the counter. Even through the grainy feed, Grace recognized it instantly. Her own face. Younger, smiling, wearing her old nurse's scrubs. Lena leaned close to the photo, whispered something, and slipped it into her robe pocket, before closing the fridge again. Then she looked directly into the camera, the ceiling camera this time, and smiled. The same slow, knowing smile. "You never learn, do you, Grace?" she said softly. The sound was faint but clear. The screen froze there, Lena's smile stretching wider, before the recording cut off. Grace stared at the laptop until the fan began to whir. Her first impulse was panic. Call Evan. Call the police. Call anyone. But then, she remembered the last time she'd sounded the alarm. 3 months ago, when she'd suspected Lena of mismanaging Evan's finances. Everyone, even Evan, had told her she was imagining things. "You've been overworked, Mom. You're tired." She's not like that. They all saw a caring wife, a gentle homemaker, not the woman who crept through her kitchen at 2 a.m., dealing with strangers and vials. Grace closed the laptop, hands trembling. She needed proof, something undeniable. And she needed to know why Lena had a photo of her. Later that morning, Lena returned. Grace heard the door click, the soft rhythm of her footsteps. She composed herself quickly, calm face, easy smile. "Morning," Lena called cheerfully. "You're up early again." "Couldn't sleep," Grace replied. "You should rest. I made soup." "Evan will be home late. Presentation at the firm." "That's kind of you." Grace forced herself to sound casual. "Can I help with anything?" Lena shook her head. "I've got it." She turned to stir the pot on the stove. The scent of herbs filled the room. Grace watched the back of her head, the smooth movements, the quiet confidence. "Lena," she said suddenly, "do you know a man named—" She hesitated, pretending to search her memory. "Kyle." Lena paused, just for a fraction of a second. "Kyle, no." "Should I?" "No reason." Grace smiled. "Someone from the hospital reminded me of someone last night." Lena resumed stirring, but Grace saw the faintest tension in her shoulders. "Good." She was listening. That night, Grace pretended to leave for another shift. She changed into scrubs, grabbed her bag, and drove away, only to circle back 15 minutes later and park quietly down the block. The house was dark except for the faint light under the kitchen door. At 12:37 a.m., a car pulled up, a dark SUV. The same man stepped out. Grace crouched behind the hedge, heart hammering, as he carried a small box toward the side door. She couldn't hear the words, but the movements were precise, familiar. Transactions she'd seen before at the hospital's back entrance, when suppliers dropped off restricted medication. The man handed Lena the box. She signed a paper, closed the door, and turned the lock. Grace took a photo on her phone, zooming in on the SUV's license plate. Back inside her car, Grace sat in silence. The photo trembled in her hands. She wasn't just dealing with a manipulative daughter-in-law. She was dealing with someone running something illegal out of her house. Drugs, stolen meds, worse. She looked at the image again, zoomed in, and noticed something on the side of the box. A faded medical label from the hospital's supplier network. She knew that logo, her hospital's. How could she even get access to that? Grace's mind flashed back to last year, when a few vials of high-demand medication went missing from storage. They'd never found the culprit. Now she was staring at the evidence sitting in her own kitchen. The next morning, Lena acted as if nothing had happened. She hummed softly while making pancakes. Grace joined her, smiling faintly. "You're in a good mood." "Why wouldn't I be?" Lena said lightly. "Everything's perfect." "Yes," Grace said. "Almost too perfect." Their eyes met. Something sharp flickered in Lena's expression before she turned back to the stove. Grace leaned against the counter, speaking softly. You know, Lena, sometimes the truth has a way of thawing, no matter how deep you freeze it. Alina's hand tightened around the spatula. Is that supposed to mean something? Grace smiled. Just a thought. She turned, walked out, and felt Lena's gaze follow her like the hum of that locked fridge. That afternoon, Grace printed the photos, copied the footage to a flash drive, and placed everything inside an envelope. Then she paused. Going to the police might expose Lena, but it could also destroy Evan. His career, his marriage, everything. No, not yet. She would make Lena destroy herself. Grace slipped the envelope into her bag. The beginnings of a plan formed quietly, as precise and calculated as the way she stitched a wound. If Lena wanted a secret war, Grace thought, she just declared it in my kitchen. And Grace had never lost a battle on her own ground. By Monday morning, Grace Whitman looked like the same wary nurse she had always been. Uniform pressed, hair pulled back, thermos of coffee in hand. But inside, the quiet exhaustion had cooled into strategy. She wasn't going to storm the police station with half-formed evidence. She wasn't going to warn Evan yet, either. She was going to make Lena expose herself. Grace began with something simple, routine. She started leaving small notes on the fridge door. Reminders, grocery lists, anything that looked ordinary. But each list carried a single hidden word, written faintly in pencil: watched, sealed, cold, open. The first morning, Lena erased it without comment. The second, she replaced the word with a small smiley face. By the fourth, she wrote back, curiosity kills. Good, she was responding. Grace added new security cameras, but this time she let Lena find one. It sat too obviously in the hallway, its red recording light blinking like a dare. 2 nights later, the memory card was missing, exactly as Grace expected. She wasn't trying to keep secrets anymore. She was building pressure. Her son stayed blind to the tension, working late and coming home half asleep. When he did notice the edge in their voices, he brushed it off. "You two need a truce," he said over dinner. "I'm caught in the middle of a cold war." Grace smiled. "Maybe we just need boundaries." Lena's fork paused mid-air. "Or maybe we need trust." "Of course," Grace said lightly, setting down her wine glass. "But trust works both ways." The air tightened. Evan missed it completely. That night, after he went to bed, Grace slipped into his home office. She knew he never locked his drawers. Among his documents, she found Lena's folder, receipts, invoices, research printouts. One sheet caught her eye, a purchase order from Medicor Logistics, the same supplier tied to the missing hospital vials. Lena had used Evan's signature. Grace photographed every page. The next day, she called an old colleague, Nurse Patel, now in hospital procurement. If someone were diverting medication from supplier shipments, Grace asked carefully, what would happen if that information reached compliance? Anonymously. Patel's answer was immediate. Internal audit. They'd freeze accounts, flag deliveries, maybe even bring in federal inspectors. Grace thanked her, hung up, and smiled. Perfect. That night, she composed an email from a public computer at the library, attaching the photos, forwarding it to the hospital's compliance office. Subject line, anonymous tip, Medicor diversion. Then she deleted every trace of it and walked out into the cool evening air, heart steady. It wasn't revenge yet. It was positioning. 2 days later, a white delivery van pulled into the driveway. Lena hurried outside to meet it, clipboard ready. Grace watched from the upstairs window. Moments later, a uniformed investigator stepped out of the passenger seat. Not a delivery, an inspection. Grace saw the flicker of panic cross Lena's face before she forced a smile. The investigator showed credentials, said something, and they both disappeared inside. Grace waited. 30 minutes later, Lena walked the man out, all charm and courtesy. But when the van drove away, her expression hardened. She locked the front door, closed every blind, and stood still for nearly a full minute. Then she whispered, too quiet for Grace to hear, and went straight to the basement. Grace followed 5 minutes later. The basement door was closed, but not fully latched. Inside, Lena was kneeling beside a metal storage chest, frantically transferring items into a new box. Grace caught flashes of vials, documents, and what looked like a small envelope labeled W, her own initial. Grace stepped back, careful not to let the floor creak, and returned upstairs before Lena could notice. When Lena came up moments later, her hands were empty. The new box was gone. Grace spent that night replaying the scene in her mind until finally an idea surfaced. A way to push Lena into her own trap. She waited until morning, then approached her in the kitchen, calm, smiling. "Lena," she began, "I found something odd in the basement last night." The younger woman froze. "Oh, a box. Metal, locked." Lena turned slowly, masking her alarm. "You must mean the storage chest. Old tools." "Maybe." Grace's tone was mild. "But I thought I heard something rattling inside." For a heartbeat, silence. Then Lena smiled. "You've been hearing a lot of things lately, Grace." Grace returned the smile. "Maybe I have. Still, Even might want to see what's down there. He's sentimental about his father's things." Lena's eyes sharpened. "I already told him everything." "I'm sure you did." Grace let the words hang before she added softly, "Just remember, truth has a way of leaking out." That evening, Grace found a new note taped to her bedroom door. "You're playing a dangerous game. Stop watching me." She laughed quietly. The handwriting trembled just enough to show strain. Later, she phoned Nurse Patel again. "How's that audit coming?" "Fast," Patel said. "They're panicking. Someone forged signatures tied to an off-site address. Looks residential." Grace thanked her again, hung up, and stood by the window watching Lena's silhouette move in the kitchen below. Every move now tightened the noose. Every calm smile pulled another thread. She didn't need to expose Lena herself. The system would do it. She just had to make sure the evidence landed in the right hands at the right time. But a small part of her wanted to see the moment Lena realized she'd lost. Friday night, Grace cooked. A rare gesture. Even was delighted, Lena cautious. They ate by candlelight, the soft clink of cutlery hiding the electricity in the air. "To family," Grace said, raising her glass. "To peace," Lena added, the faintest tremor in her voice. Halfway through the meal, Grace set down her fork. "Even, an inspector came by this week while you were at work." Even frowned. "Here." "Why?" Grace shrugged. "Ask your wife." Lena froze. "It was a misunderstanding," she said quickly. "Wrong address." Even looked between them. "What's going on?" Grace leaned back, calm, watching Lena's face. "Maybe nothing. But I think we'll find out soon enough." Lena's jaw tightened. "You're trying to ruin me." "No, dear," Grace said softly. "You're doing that yourself." For the first time since the second fridge appeared, Lena had no reply. That night, Grace heard movement again, soft, deliberate. She waited until it faded, then crept down the hall. The fridge door stood open. The silver case was gone. On the counter lay a single folded note addressed to her. She opened it. "You wanted the truth, Grace. Now you'll get it. But you won't like where it leads." Grace felt the chill of the open refrigerator brush her skin. The hum had stopped. The light inside flickered once, then died. She closed the door slowly, the latch clicking into place like the end of a sentence. Whatever Lena planned next, the real game had just begun, and Grace was ready to finish it. 3 days passed before the silence broke. Grace waited for it, like a seasoned nurse waits for the last monitor beep. Before calling time of death, it began with a single phone call. Mrs. Whitman, speaking. This is Inspector Donovan, Hospital Compliance. We'd like to ask about an address connected to Medicor Logistics. Your name came up in the paperwork. Grace kept her voice calm. Of course. Come by any time. When she hung up, she found Lena standing at the kitchen doorway. Who was that? Hospital audit, Grace said, sliding the phone into her pocket. They're tracing missing shipments. Nothing to worry about. Lena's knuckles whitened on the doorframe. You told them something. Grace smiled gently. I've barely been home. Lena's mouth opened, then closed again. She turned away, muttering, You don't know what you've started. Oh, I think I do. The next morning, 2 inspectors and a uniformed officer arrived. Evan, bewildered and undershaven, answered the door while Grace poured coffee, as if entertaining old friends. They were polite, professional, until they asked for access to the basement and the second fridge. Lena stepped forward, all charm. I'm sure this is unnecessary. The lead inspector held up a warrant. Grace watched quietly as they cut the padlock. Cold vapor escaped as the seal broke, rolling across the tile like fog. Inside lay rows of small, silver cases, identical to the one Grace had seen on the footage. Each was labeled with a hospital serial number. One inspector murmured, We've been missing these for months. Lena's face drained of color. This isn't what it looks like. Evan stared at her. Then what is it? It's research? She stammered. A side project. The hospital wastes so much medication. The officer interrupted. Mom, step aside, please. Grace set down her cup, the soft clink echoing like punctuation. By the time they left, Lena's composure had fractured. She sat at the kitchen table, hands trembling, lips pressed white. Evan paced. You forged my signature. You used our address! I was trying to help us! Lena cried. You said we needed money. Your loans, your job, everything. I never asked you to steal! Grace said nothing. She stood at the window, sunlight catching in her silver hair. Lena turned to her suddenly. You did this. You've been watching me, turning him against me. Grace met her eyes. You turned yourself against everyone, dear. Lena lunged up from the chair. You think you've won. You don't know what I've lost for this family. Then perhaps you should have chosen better investments. Evan slammed his fist against the counter. Enough, both of you. He stormed out, door rattling behind him. The house fell silent, except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. Emptier now, but still running, as if mocking them. Night came quietly. Rain brushed the windows. Grace sat in the living room knitting when Lena appeared again. Eyes rimmed red, voice hoarse. I didn't start it, she whispered. Someone else did. I just kept it going. Grace didn't look up. That sounds like a confession. It's a plea, Lena said, stepping closer. If you tell them I didn't know, maybe they'll go easy. I'll disappear. You'll never see me again. Grace lowered her hands, the needles clicking to a stop. You broke my house. You used my son. You smiled while doing it. You don't get to disappear that easily. Lena's breath hitched. You're cruel. No, Grace said softly. I'm precise. There's a difference. Lena turned to leave. But Grace added one final sentence, quiet as a scalpel. "Check the freezer before you go." Lena hesitated, then crossed to the fridge. Inside the freezer compartment sat a single envelope, sealed in plastic. Her name was written across it in neat cursive. She opened it with trembling fingers. Inside were photographs, still frames from the hidden cameras, time-stamped, crystal clear. One showed her exchanging vials with the hooded man. Another captured the forged documents with Evan's signature. A note lay beneath them: insurance. Duplicate copies already sent to compliance. "I suggest honesty." For a moment, Lena just stared. Then she let out a sound. Half sob, half laugh. "You really did think of everything." Grace looked up from her chair. "It's what nurses do. We prepare for the worst." Lena's shoulders sagged. "You could have told me. You could have stopped me before." "I did," Grace said evenly. "You just weren't listening." By morning, Lena was gone. She left behind her wedding ring, her phone, and a house that felt too large. Within days, the investigation widened. Lena's accomplice was arrested. The media called it a pharmaceutical diversion ring. Evan's name was cleared completely. His signature had been proved forged. He moved out for a while, shaken, ashamed. Grace let him. Sometimes healing required distance. The second fridge was hauled away as evidence, leaving a faint outline on the tile, like a ghost that refused to fade. The house was quieter now. Grace had retired from the hospital, started teaching part-time at the nursing school. She planted herbs in the backyard, took long morning walks. One afternoon a letter arrived. No return address, just her name. Inside was a single photograph, a coastal view. Cliffs above a gray sea. On the back, in familiar handwriting, were 5 words. "You were right, I lost." Grace smiled faintly. She folded the photo and slipped it into the back of her journal between old family pictures. Later, as she brewed tea, she caught her reflection in the window. The kitchen looked peaceful again. Sunlight on clean counters. One refrigerator humming softly. She touched the fridge door, remembering the nights of humming dread, the whispered threats, the moment she decided not to be afraid anymore. "Some things," she said to the empty room, "keep better in the cold." The kettle clicked off. Steam rose. Outside, wind stirred the maple leaves like applause. Grace carried her tea to the porch, sat down, and let the warmth reach her hands. The war was over. The nurse had won.